It's June. We're halfway through 2024 already, and that is crazy to think about on this thing called the Just Start the Conversation podcast. It's brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network, joined as always by Jody McCloud Missmer and Amie, Alanson, Dundon. We're talking about how it's June. We're talking about seasonal change. We're going from spring to summer, and that's kind of the conversation today, my friends. How are we? How are things?
I'm good. I'm ready for change.
Yes.
Let's go.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the direction we're going today, how to deal with change, especially when it's outside of our control. A lot of different angles of pursuit on this one. You can talk about your work life. You can talk about your personal life. Some sudden changes that are actually, supposed to be really, really good, but can be a little tough. And some changes that are all of a sudden that really kind of have to make you have a pivot in life. But certainly as the seasons change, something to wrap your arms around. And we're a positive podcast around here. So we're going to focus on the positive things. So to kickstart, I guess, listen, colleges have just graduated, right? Maybe there's a lot of parents with college kids and high school kids that are getting ready to go off to college kids who have graduated. Empty nesters, that's a change in life that maybe for a long time you thought, listen, I'm a dad with 2 young kids. And right now it feels like, man, I can't wait for college, but I know someday I'm going to look back and think, my gosh, where did those little bundles of joy go? So, Amie, I'll go ahead and start with you. Let's start with that change in terms of just something maybe you had anticipated for a while, and now all of a sudden it's here, and it's, SpaghettiOs, what am I going to do? Empty nesters. What do you think?
Well, it's funny. I'm in that empty nester stage now with my husband, and one of our birdies is back for a few months. So that's it's are we ever really empty nesters? Like we are and then we're not, and then we are and then we're not, which is a great example of how to deal with all that change, right? And I think change for most people, we kind of all go through certain stages, right? Where I'm thinking about it, I know it's going to happen, but it's so far off, I don't really have to worry about it. And then we get to the point where we're prepping for it, and then we're doing it. And then, living in the change can be the hardest part, right? Because we can't really anticipate what stuff is going to look like. Being an empty nester, changing jobs. Change happens every day to all of us, right? So,
yeah, I think that it's interesting to hear you say you prepare for it, because the reality is, Crockett, you have little ones, so you're in the process of preparing for a change that may or may not come. You're assuming and making plans for what might not happen. So I think there's a natural stress to that as well, and change is stressful, but the lead up to change is stressful and can be stressful. And one of the favorite things, and I don't know who originally said this, but when we make plans, God laughs, because we don't know what's going to happen, and that's what change is. I mean, change can be planned. It can be, you can prepare for it, but when you're in it, it's very different. And as I was preparing for today, I heard something that I never thought of when it comes to change, and that's that change is loss. And I never really thought of change as loss. I historically would think of change as just something new or different. But as I thought about it, and as I read more into it, you're grieving what was. So change can be loss because of that grief that comes from what you don't have anymore, or it just looks different. So I thought I never ever thought of change as loss.
Which is interesting, and a lot of people don't, right? But what's interesting is that if you look at the kind of graphs and bell-shaped curves of change, because it's out there, you can look up some really great journal stuff on change, and kind of at the pit and midway of change is depression for a lot of people, is where we see depression fall into play in the middle of change, because it's one of the stages of grief. So it's interesting that you brought that up, because we definitely, more so than anxiety, which really surprised me. So in my arena, change for me, provokes probably more stress and anxiety than depression. But on the bell-shaped curve, more people experience depression with change and
So
anxiety.
it's normal.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting to kind of come back to what you were saying, Jody. When you talk about change as loss, I wonder how many people, and perhaps for two women sitting from your perspective and the people that you talk to on a day in, day out basis, how often do you think people have the idea of change with a negative connotation to it? Like, you think, if I think of a sudden change in life, there's a good chance I'm thinking someone passed away suddenly, someone was suddenly laid off from a job. And do you think that there is we use the word stigma a lot here, but maybe just like a negative aura around that word change, typically when you're talking about like a life change in particular?
I mean, I think so. I think that there's a statement that people often use, and I am 100% guilty of it, when people say it is what it is. There's kind of a give up point, right? Like,
What is it?
but it's not. It's not. That's
Right.
what I'm saying. Like, but we all sort of view, not we all, myself, I know others that say that statement often. And so I think the stigma behind that, Crockett, is that I don't even have to acknowledge what's happening. I just have to say, well, it is what it is. But it's really not.
In my book, it is what it is means is equivalent to denial.
Right.
Right?
You've almost
I'm just going
given
to
up.
ignore it. I'm just going to
Yeah.
pretend it is what it is. I'm going to move on. When in fact, you're saying it is what it is to protect you from the hurt or pain or anxiety or depression or, the fear of the unknown, right? Because change, when something happens in our life that's a change, say I get a new, we get a new work structure, a new org structure.
A new
right?
table.
A new table, anything. A new,
Shout out to the new table, by the way. What up, new table?
your family welcomes a new family member, a child gets married, and you bring somebody into that family, right? It's unknown, so there's always a hesitancy period where you're waiting it out. One of the things that I think is really helpful when you think about making change is something called SWOT, SWOT, right? And it's where when something happens with change, you look at the strengths of that change. You kind of break it into 4 columns, right? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? And where are the threats? And I think we do that for all changes in our life. We go through that area of SWAT surveillance. I think of guys in body armor, running in to save the day. But I think if I can look at change in those 4 areas and I can think about what are the strengths of this change, right? What are the weaknesses? Where are the cracks? Where can we start to kind of shore up the holes in the dam, right? And then where are my opportunities, mine, in whatever this change is? And, how can I eliminate threats to, that might make this change not so good for me? Mm-hmm. So I think we can break that all down.
As we kind of look at change that perhaps is maybe a little more permanent, the loss of someone versus perhaps losing a job, you're laid off, a change of that nature. Both, we used depression, anxiety, all of those things. Certainly you're going to feel those things in any scenario. That's a negative one, but just kind of an approach about the things that we can change when there is change. If you lose a job, that you now have perhaps your approach is, okay, I've got wide open spaces to run in here. Obviously losing a loved one, a significant other in your life, that's inevitable. That's something that we're all going to have to deal with at different points, but just perhaps approaching those in a similar way, and also giving yourself the grace to perhaps in both of those moments have like a moment of just, damn, I need to kind of sit with this one a little bit. Mm-hmm. So just kind of I hate to so loosely say kind of get over the hump that's kind of in front of you, but just good ways that people can take change that certainly can be a negative and kind of turn them into, I hate to say it is what it is, but pushing forward and making the next steps in life now that those things have happened.
So I'm going to say I'm going to challenge everyone to, instead of saying it is what it is, to say it is what I make it to be. Let's just reframe, right? So I think reframing is one way that we can put our arms around change. And then it's funny you mentioned about sitting with it. I actually wrote down be still. So I think that when there's change, there's a point where you have to sit and be still. Just listen.
Yeah,
just
be
feel
mindful.
it. Yeah.
And let yourself absorb it and process it, I think is really why that works. Being still works because it gives us a chance to not react right away.
And you're not pushing through it, thereby avoiding it or ignoring it and kind of going with just rolling forward and saying, well, we're just going to push through. We're just going to push through. And I'm not saying that there aren't moments in change that there is work that needs to be done, right? When you lose someone, there are plans that need to be made. You may be responsible for funeral planning. You may be responsible for, making the drive to the college campus to drop your child off. So there are things in the moment that you have to push through, but you need to find those opportunities to be still and absorb it and accept it for the change that it is. And then say, okay, now what do I do with this? How does this go forward and what does it look like for me?
Yeah. Acceptance is challenging sometimes, right? To accept a change that feels like a 1-2 punch. But if we take that time, Jody, like you're talking about, to sit patiently and kind of be with it, it helps us find a way to evaluate the strengths and the opportunities in that change.
And it usually is a 1-2 punch.
Yep.
Like, let's be honest. It's very rare as humans that we get to schedule change and or we get to resolve this change moment before we enter into another change moment. Typically, change is happening every step throughout every phase. It's happening at work, it's happening at home, it's happening internally to our bodies. There's change that happens outside of ourselves, and then there's change as we age. There are things that people are dealing with on a regular basis that aren't even evident to other people. Pain in your joints or whatever it may be, or hot flashes are a great example. But so change is very different. So it's very rare that in this lesson of life that there's one change at a time and then you resolve and then you sign up for a new change and a sign up for, so it compounds. So if you don't find those moments to be still and to sit in it, then I think that's where you start to experience some physical, I think you'll see some psychosomatic issues. You'll start to see some emotional issues. You start to see stressors that are outward, like fighting or snapping, or maybe increase alcohol consumption just to handle the situation. But it's going to be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 punch, not just a 1, 2.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And I think it's figuring out how I'm going to react to the 1, 2, 3, 4 punch, right? What are my counter punches? What am I going to do about it? We should always do something about it rather than do nothing. You can sit and be mindful, I think, and patient for a while, but at some point you have to say, okay, what's my move? What's my move?
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm not suggesting that you sit and be still and then you just sit over there in the corner and people are like, oh, she's being still right now. She's absorbing. There's a point where we're going to go, stop absorbing. Like, we need to participate now. So yeah, you're right. There's action to be taken, or a reaction to be taken, I would think.
Yeah, and sometimes we have to help our friends and loved ones take action if they're going through a change that's really, really, really hard. And that was totally unexpected. It's okay to let other people help you with that change too. I think is the other really important thing to note is that sometimes if the change is really dramatic and drastic and very unexpected or powerful in any way, it's okay to accept help from people around us if they say, let me help you with this change. This is going to take more than you, And oftentimes we don't let other people in, which doesn't help with the process.
Yeah, I actually kind of wanted to piggyback. I'm glad we kind of pivoted to kind of being almost like the perhaps like the secondary person, kind of seeing a change in someone else, or you have a loved one who's going through something, you've got a friend who's going through something. Amie, you said acceptance is challenging. As a loved one, if perhaps listen, we alluded to a marriage earlier. That's a part where you have to be accepting of someone into your family. Obviously, you hope that everything is bells and whistles and birds and flowers. Not always necessarily the case. And perhaps you have, and maybe your intentions are very good. You see some writing on the wall that clearly says, I don't think that this is a great match. Perhaps I don't think that this is a great person. Acceptance is challenging. So at what point do you kind of, as that secondary person, take it upon yourself to say, hey, are you sure you want to go? I will give, I always use this as a joke with my friends. I've been a best man in a couple of weddings. I've been a groomsman in a couple of weddings. And at some point when I could see the groom has been nervous before, I've always said, hey, I can get my car to Atlantic City in 45 minutes. Like, just as a joke, I know you're getting married. We all love her. Just as a joke to kind of loosen the tension in the air. If, however, you are a person that wants to suggest that perhaps you've got a car that's ready to roll outside, but I think my question is, how can you kind of be secondarily accepting of someone else's decision, particularly if you in your mind think this might not be a great decision?
First, I need to know if anybody ever took you up on that offer.
Nobody ever took me up on the offer.
Okay.
But it was always a good kind of just
icebreaker.
Like
Yeah. I just think that's important for future people who want to offer you up as a best man. Like, a good out.
I'm here for a reason, buddy. I've known you a lot longer than I've known her. If you tell me I got to get my keys and we got to go, no questions asked, pal. That's what I'm here for. So.
Just curious.
It's a good friend.
Yeah. So secondary person, I think you have to know your relationship, perhaps, but I think it's, to your point, Crockett, it doesn't have to come in the form of advice. It can come in the form of, I've noticed this.
Yes. That's what I was going to say.
Did you notice this? And kind of spin it that way, because I may or may not have just had a recent conversation with someone who it was more having them share what they were noticing that I noticed 6 months ago, that they just noticed, 2 days ago or whatever it was. And it was almost like a tell me more about that situation, so that you could listen, so they could hear it, so they could put it out there. And it may be the first time they're actually saying it out loud, that they're acknowledging the change. Even if it's asking, my parents are older, so we've had some recent health issues, and having someone say, how is your mom? Because yes, you're asking about my mom, but you're also asking, how are you handling this change with your mom? Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes it's just, that's the secondary person. It's not advice necessarily. It's
being a listener. And I think as a listener, as a friend, as a partner, I think, again, it goes back to healthy communication and I statements, right? And I think, I feel, I want, I need, I know you've been really preoccupied with your parents' health issues. I need you to know I'm here for you to talk about it. And I notice how stressed you've been about it. And, let's sit down and process it. I mean, you don't necessarily have to dive into giving advice to somebody who's going through change as much as just be there for them, I think, sometimes.
And what you're seeing may not be the result of that change. I think it's interesting that people will assume, they'll assume that your parents' health changes are the reason why you look so stressed or aren't sleeping. And in reality, there may be something you're not even aware of that's happening in their life that's really compounding that. And you're not going to know that unless you ask. And that person may not even be recognizing it.
No.
Right? Like, as I mentioned, there are things that are happening inside of people's bodies and people's homes, and all of those situations are going all the time. We tend to, as friends or outside of that circle, notice those significant changes. But the reality is any level of change is going to be tough. Any change.
Yeah, and by human nature, we're fixers, right? So if we're with somebody that we know and we know they're going through a change, our automatic reaction is, what can I do to help this person fix it? And that may not be what somebody needs, right? We, in just the American culture, we tend to, when something big happens, when there's maybe a death or bad news of some sort, we want to cook. It's what we cook things, we take things to people's houses, and that's going to help with the change. And it's those little things help with the everyday lightening some of the load. But it doesn't fix it. It's just being there and being supportive.
And I don't know that you know the answer to this, and I know I don't, but I would be really interested, and I'm definitely going to take a look at this. I'm interested culturally in how change impacts and what the perspectives are of change. I know we did a podcast some time ago about death and grieving, and we went through some cultural differences in terms of the involvement of individuals in death and dying. And I would be curious to see how culture impacts change, how different individuals are different, where you come from. I mean, I know for me personally, and those of you who have been listening, and Amie certainly who knows me, Crockett unfortunately has had the opportunity to get to know me. It's a lot of dark humor, a lot of sarcasm on my end. Full disclosure, and this can go in or out. You can edit as you see fit, but my mom was recently in the hospital, big change, and the doctor called me to tell me she was coming home. This is so horrible. And I said, now this was just this week, and I said, well, I guess I'm going to have to go buy her a Mother's Day gift then. And the doctor was like, oh, he literally said it out loud. Oh my God. And I said, oh, it's okay. You can tell her that. So of course I tell my mom that, hey, I guess I have to buy you a Mother's Day gift, but it was cute. But I think we all deal with it differently.
Yeah. Humor, cooking, all of that stuff. We all deal with it differently.
I think that's, I can speak for myself, and, to your point there, Jody, I am always going to try to use humor. From the time that I was a little kid, that's one of the things that I've always tried to utilize. If you were crying at recess, I was the one who came over and hit myself in the head with a dodgeball, because I didn't even know look, stop being sad, and that's still my philosophy now, and has probably gotten me in trouble a time or two, because particularly, my wife and I have different personalities, and I'm very much a, hey, let's come on and kind of, I understand that this isn't fun or this isn't great, but and she will be a person, to your point, that just needs to sit in it a little bit. Mm-hmm. Like that, she's not ready to move on right there. She is a person that needs to sit in it a little bit, think about it, evaluate it. And so it's just interesting kind of, and to come back to your point, Jody, I'm interested when we discuss cultural differences, as we talk about loss and we kind of talk about losing a loved one and we talk about things of that nature, I'm interested in as we talk about the cultural differences, the celebration of life, where perhaps for us, a funeral is like this. If you're setting up a will, if you've got things going on, if it's a conversation, particularly you've got kids, a significant other, at some point you have to have a conversation like, okay, if all of a sudden something changes tomorrow, what do you want? And it's not a fun conversation to have, but where someone might say, I want a mass, I want to be buried.
Oh, I thought you meant things. I'm so sorry. I thought you meant meant, what do you want? I want the dishes. I'd really like to have that couch.
That's
swear, I thought and I was like, I mean, yeah, I could see that. I mean, we did Post-it notes and put them on the bottom of things that
I
we
mean, who
wanted.
gets the
But
pinball machine?
sorry, so it's what someone wants in preparation for their.
Like how much about yourself could you kind of look at evaluating how you deal with change or loss in that? Like for me, I want like a celebration, like have a beef and beer, have people donate to like I love St. Baldrick's childhood cancer research. I've been shaving my head for years for them. Like I don't want everybody being sad. I've thought about in the moments of my life where maybe if all of a sudden my health is deteriorating, thinking about if I really want people to see me in that state or if I want them to kind of remember me the way that I've been through my life. I'm
really, you're preparing the people around you for that change. You're preparing them. You're saying by doing this planning and by giving you a layout for what I expect, I'm preparing you for this change. You're fixing future change that's going to happen, which is fine. I have a whole song list. I have like 4. Full disclosure.
You have a playlist for when
I have
you
a
die?
playlist. I have a playlist because have you ever gone into a viewing and the music is like
Morbid.
absolutely horrible?
Sure.
And I think, what? I don't want that. Like, so I have a couple pages in a journal, FYI, children, if you're listening, in a journal, and it has my funeral playlist, like my viewing playlist. So as you're going,
some OAR on there, I would imagine
there will be some OAR on there, 100%. Yeah, but like as you're in line, I want you to think about, oh, I remember going to that concert with her, or hey, I remember giving her tickets that somebody didn't pick up. Like that should be fun.
You. That's you. You don't want people to be sad, right? And we don't get to decide how somebody else feels.
Sure.
However, you want to set them up for success emotionally. So that's
right, in change.
Right.
Like it's going to be a change, but I want to, so I think Crockett, some of us do that. Some of us, now what I did was it helpful? No. Have I planned my funeral? Have I paid for things? No. How do I have a will? No. But I sure as heck know what songs are going to be playing.
Yeah. But I got a banging playlist.
Let me tell you.
we should have a playlist for all change in our life.
Oh,
I think we all should have a personal change playlist, right? What are the songs that are going to get me through whatever this change is?
I think we do that. I mean,
Yeah.
some people aren't into music, and I question that. But if you're into music and you're feeling a certain way, like there are certain songs that I listen to in certain moods or in transition. Like if I'm going from home to work on a Friday, it's this song. If I'm going from work to home, it might be this song. I think a lot. Yeah, I like playlists for change.
But I think we do that in our heads, right? We can't always, wherever we are, just turn on a playlist. But we can certainly think about what's the stuff that gets me through that depression? What's the stuff that gets me through that change, whether it's medical or physical? What's my metaphorical playlist, right? What are my go-tos? Who are the people on my playlist? Right?
I like that.
What
yeah.
are the things on my playlist? What are the foods on my playlist? What are the things that shouldn't be on my change playlist because they get me in trouble or they help me spiral downward, right? Yeah. Like the alcohol.
That was a moment in the podcast, right? That's so cool. A playlist for change and not music. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's so smart.
We're a bunch of Marty Pantses on this podcast. I kind of want to come back to, listen, one of the reasons that this whole conversation, Just Start the Conversation podcast started is this is a mental health podcast. And to dig into myself a little bit, the times that I started therapy in my life, and there's been, a couple of different times where I've decided to go back, have been typically around a sudden change, something that wasn't anticipated. And so I just want to kind of give you two the chance to talk a little bit about how impactful, I know how impactful it's been on me. There's a reason I'd love to host this show, because I know kind of looking inward at myself and kind of getting help from other people has had an impact on me. Sudden change, we've said all the things that we can say. It's scary. You get anxious. You can get depressed, all of those things. I want to give you two a chance to, as people in your positions at St. Luke's, to kind of talk about if somebody is feeling a certain kind of way, maybe in particular if they haven't had a conversation with somebody else. And Jody, you alluded to the fact that maybe, yeah, they're worried about their parent that's in the hospital, but there's something else that's going on that nobody else even knows about that people want to tap into. Just the kind of open arms that are there from people in your seats, and just the kind of where to begin for people if they haven't ever done this process, if they haven't gone through it, they haven't talked to professionals, just kind of where they can start.
I always say the first thing you should do is find out whether or not your workplace or your significant other's workplace has an employee assistance program. I think, we will often get phone calls from individuals who are looking for therapy. They'll just say, I need therapy. And we have to kind of pause for a moment and say, what do you have access to? Are you at a place where maybe you have an HR system or process or program that you can go to where you can talk to someone and they can help guide you in that arena? Employee assistance programs, because change can be related to perhaps a legal situation, perhaps it's financial, perhaps it's emotional, but EAP programs, employee assistance programs, often have access points for each of those.
Right.
So it may not be therapy, DBT or CBT that you need. It may be you need a financial counselor. And EAP programs can connect you with financial counselors. It may be a legal situation that's causing those elements. So they will give you access to legal advisors. And so I always suggest that be someone's first step, is if you are a working person or your spouse or significant other and you are on their plan, find out if the employer offers an employee assistance program, because the change you're experiencing may not require intensive one-on-one therapy. It may be guidance and assistance to an employee that they need. And I think I would just say that's, as a manager, I will often recommend that my employees reach out to EAP and have a conversation with an EAP counselor so they can help guide that. So I would say that for me is usually a number one. But on the clinical side...
Yeah, on the clinical side, my go-to is always your primary care doc first, right? Because maybe the change that you're experiencing is something that has a physical medical component to it that you're not even aware of, that could be easily fixed by talking to your family doc, your primary care doc, right? And if not, that primary care doc, if they feel like, okay, this is something that probably warrants an assessment with a clinical therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, then they'll make that appropriate referral. But, the EAP, to Jody's point, and then your primary care physician are two really good places to start. Or if you belong to a faith community of any time, sometimes your faith leader is a good place to start to kind of talk about some of those initial changes, and then they will say, hey, okay, I think this is the direction you need to go. So there are definitely lots of people and places out there that can help start kind of take a look at what you need. And then...
Yeah, because we know right now that access to clinical therapy, it's tough access right now. There's not enough providers nationwide. We know this. But we also know that there are resources before you reach that point. And, for women speaking to their obstetrics and gynecological, physicians and providers, I think having those conversations and life changes. If you're taking your child to the pediatrician, that's not beyond the pales to have a conversation with the pediatrician and say, hey, I'm experiencing this. Is this normal? I'm reacting to my child in this way. Is that normal? Like, should I be concerned? But the PCP, that's paramount.
It really is. And oftentimes there are support groups out there for whatever change you're going through.
Sure.
Whether it be cardiac issues or depression or finances or divorce, whatever that change is. often those folks that you go to in healthcare can guide you to those support groups.
There's a lot of caregiver support groups out there as well. You know, parents, you know, children taking care of parents. There are support groups out there for grandparents raising grandchildren. You have things that are related specifically to substance use disorders. You have Al-Anon. You have Narcotics Anonymous. You have there's so many things out there from a support group perspective that you can gain access to, and really a lot of those are free and they're communal.
I mean, certainly as a clinical therapist, I'm going to always fall that direction. I think everybody in life should have a therapist at some point. I think, you know, I wish we could all have a therapist forever, right? The world would be such a different place. We all.
There's sort of an inside joke there, but yes, Amie wishes everyone could.
Yeah.
Amie would like to assign a therapist to all of us.
Amie, acceptance is challenging. That's one of the key points today.
The key takeaway today is everyone needs a therapist,
And everybody needs a change playlist.
I actually really like that, because I will say this. I'm going to err on the side of I don't know that everyone needs a therapist, because your change that you're navigating may require a larger group of human beings. So it may be a support group. It might be a clinical support group. It might be, you might need to include other people in that conversation. And that's not happening in a one-to-one therapeutic environment. You know, you might need to have that conversation with your PCP, because there might be something happening medically for you that's going on that you need to bring that to somebody's attention, especially as we age and as we get older and things start to change, and they're happening at the same time. You know, your children are getting married, or they're going away to college, or there's a significant loss. You need to engage as many professionals in those conversations so that there are more eyes on the situation. Being still is not the same as being alone. And that's not something
That
we're
was
recommending.
profound, too.
Did you like that?
I did like that.
So playlists and being still does not mean being alone. Sweatshirts. That'll be the tattoo I get when I ever have the guts to do it. It
There
won't.
you go. Or it is what I make it to be.
That's right.
Is also, I think, one of the key points that I circled as we're getting ready to go here. It is what I make it to be. And I also want to reiterate, if you need a getaway car, folks, I'm here. Just let me know.
You're the guy.
You're the guy.
Gas up and we'll get out of here. Well, my friends, in all seriousness, another great conversation, of course. We've had a lot of terrific conversations. You can find the Just Start the Conversation podcast on YouTube, Google, Spotify. Google Just Start the Conversation podcast. You'll find plenty of episodes talking about all things mental health. As always, I appreciate the time of you both, Jody McCloud Missmer, Amie, Alanson, Dundon. Thank you, as always, for listen. We alluded to a sense of humor earlier, and I think for me, some of the things we talked about, sense of humor and music, are two things that certainly have helped me a lot dealing with things in life. So hopefully a little bit of humor, even if it was about your mom, Jody, come on, helped us go a long way in this episode. So to both of you, thank you as always. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Crockett. Have a great one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It is the Just Start the Conversation podcast. It's brought to you by St. Luke's University Health Network. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts or at sluhn.org.